It's a real question. What should India do? Should we align our digital approach to the Europeans or to the Americans? Underneath all this, in terms of markets, the Europeans are as big as a whole as the United States. The difference, I think, is that what the Americans say is that the Europeans have seen a collapse of productivity. The Americans say this is because excess regulation. Which one is pro the European model and which one is pro the American model? I don't think our experts have said so. I'm not at all confident that this decision can be left to a few bureaucrats who happen to be in the relevant ministry that does the negotiation.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Capital Calculus. I am your host, Anil Padmanabhan. Fluid geopolitics, fracturing globalisation, rising protectionism, and increasing trend of weaponizing trade and finance are generating unprecedented headwinds to global economic growth. The big question is, how does India survive and, more importantly, thrive in such a world order? What will it take, especially since it has set itself this audacious task of becoming a developed economy by 2047? In other words, in the next 22 years, it has to grow its per capita income eightfold to $18,000. To walk us through this challenge, we have in our studios today Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia. Frankly, he needs no introductions, but for the record, he is a technocrat, economist, and somebody who has served in various capacities in the government of India, including as finance secretary and deputy chairman of the erstwhile planning commission. And last but not the least, he is one of the key architects of economic reforms. I'm sure we will dwell on this in our conversation today. Welcome, Mr. Ahluwalia.
Thank you. Great pleasure to be on your show, Anil.
Thank you. Mr. Ahluwalia, in the last few weeks, India has come under fresh friendly fire from the United States, basically President Trump and his team. At the same time, geopolitics is in ferment. Neither China nor the US have shied away from weaponizing either trade or finance. So in fundamentally different circumstances, this seems to be a 91 moment. What are your thoughts?
Well, this parallel between our current predicament and the very serious situation we faced in 91 has been drawn by many people. I would like to warn that it's not necessarily a totally accurate one. In 91, the world was not in turmoil. Everything was going fine. The world was moderately stable. Growth was good. We were the ones that suffered a big problem. So in a way, it was very clear that we had to ask ourselves, why are we not performing as well as, let's say, other countries in East Asia? And I think the answers were very clear. We had done a lot of work on it ourselves. And we had the big advantage that we had Mr. Narasimha Rao as Prime Minister, who was briefed that, look, this is a very serious situation and you will have to make big changes. And he knew that. And he was also briefed that if you want to restore confidence, you better get a finance minister who will carry credibility around the world. We're lucky that that choice ended up with Dr. Montek Singh, who was very well known and also very sympathetic to the need for change. He, in a way, belonged to the older Nehruvian school of controlled capitalism and so on. But I think he had worked out that lots of this is not working and we need fundamental change. So I think he used his budget to explain to people the need for this change. But all of this was responding to our domestic failing. He did not say that the world has become problematic, etc., etc. So it was a very difficult job, but a less complex one than at the moment. The problem at the moment is we seem to be doing well or have been doing well, and the world has changed suddenly. And there are multiple conflicting bits of advice that are coming. One view is that, being open is now old-fashioned. You better close down, look at your own domestic market. Atmanirbhar equals self-reliance, equals anti-imports. The other view is, no, that's wrong. Atmanirbhar means you must do well, you must develop domestic capability, but you must also export. And at different times, the government, to be fair, has said that they want to become part of global supply chains. And to become part of global supply chain, we must remain open. So there are these tensions, and how are we going to move forward?
Chief, I want to take you back to 91 once again in a different context. You authored the M document. In many ways, it provided the blueprint, as it were, to the big burst in economic reforms we saw in 91, including delicensing. Suppose you were given the same task today. Like you explained very well, the circumstances are fundamentally different. That time, the domestic economy was in turmoil and global economy was stable. Today, the roles are reversed. So what would be the big priorities of an M document in, say, 2025?
Well, I think we do need an articulation of the directions that policy should move. The target that has been set, we no longer have 5-year targets, that's fine. The target that has been set, as you yourself pointed out, the Viksit Bharat getting to developed country status by 2047. Requires an annual growth rate in excess of 8% in real terms per year. We did achieve that kind of rate for about 4 or 5 years during the 2000s. But if you look at the last 20 years, the average growth rate we've had is somewhere around 6.5%. Okay? So really, the name of the game is, how can we, in order to achieve Viksit Bharat, can we raise this 6.5% to say 8 plus? This would be a massive achievement under any circumstances. But we have to do this in a situation where the world economy is full of uncertainties, and that makes it more difficult. So we need to know what is it that we need to do, for which I think we have to lay down, if you like, a reform agenda over 20 years. Now, 20 years is too long a time to plan for reform agendas, but we can always sort of cut that down and say, look, in terms of priority, what has to be done in the next, say, 5 to 10 years? And then some of the rest we'll pick up later. That, I assume that Niti Aayog or some such organization is preparing such a document. At one stage, we were told that they're working on it. I hope they are. I've not seen the outcome yet. But the important thing is that there will always be alternative views. So I am not a great believer in laying out a detailed reform agenda and saying this is what we have to do. I think we need to lay down a set of very broad principles. And then based on those principles, applying those principles, we'll need to lay down a specific reform agenda. To some extent, those principles have been laid down. It's clear that we are counting on a big boost from the private sector. It's clear that we want more foreign direct investment. It's not clear how open we want to be in trade. Government has not said that we don't want to be, but many of the voices. So I think you need to address that question. What do we have to do? Similarly, for example, it's very clear that we need reforms in the land market and the labor market. A lot of this has to be done by state governments, not the central government. So are we going to allow state governments to have their own patterns so that if they want to do it one way, they can do it one way, or do they have to follow some kind of national agenda? That's something we need to decide. Similarly, there's complete agreement that we need to, for example, modernizing the tax system. The GST obviously is one step has been taken. But we need to know, is this it? Or are there more things we have to do? I think there are. Equally, in, for example, areas like ease of doing business, I'm not aware of a single person who thinks that this is not a problem. And the government indeed has said it is a problem. I believe they've set up some committee, internal committee, etc. I'm not a great believer in the setting up of internal committees. It's much better, in my view, to set up an external committee which has ex-members of the civil service, retired members of this and that and the other. They'll all be called sir by the existing secretaries, but they'll be more objective, okay? and let them produce an agenda saying, look, this is what you need to do. Government should not necessarily own the agenda. Government should say, we're releasing it for discussion. Then everybody will have a chance to look at it. Otherwise, what happens is an internal process leads to certain decisions that are announced. And you have to remember that when decisions are announced, then the presumption is that everybody has thought about it. And while maybe some marginal tweaks are possible, basic change is not possible. And that's why I would very strongly hope that in all the coming reform agendas, rather than outlining an agenda to begin with, the government has a process whereby somebody puts forward the recommended reform from which the government then chooses. Now, whether that's feasible or not, I don't know.
In fact, what you said is so true. If I remember right, in the 1990s, there were lots of white papers by experts like Jagdish Bhagwati and T.N. Srinivasan, who argued the need for trade. Then public finance, Rajesh Chalaya, they came up with the document. So there is no dearth of institutional knowledge on what has to be done.
Not at all. I mean, we have all the expertise in the country. Many of these people are very aware of what's happening around the world. And I think if you ask them how we should move forward, you'll get a pretty good agenda. And actually, I would even encourage them to think of two alternatives. Let me give a simple example. One of the big issues right now is the growth of the digital economy. We are clearly excited about it also because we've got Aadhaar and we've got mobile penetration is high. Hopefully it'll increase. I mean, every household almost has a smartphone. Trouble is the man has it and it's more difficult for the woman or the children to get it. But in 5 years, that will also change. So the digital economy is big. Now, if you look at the global growth of attitudes towards the digital economy, it consists of a tremendous amount of enthusiasm about its enabling possibilities, combined with a great deal of hesitation about its dumbing down possibility, and also its loss of privacy. Okay, and the three broad approaches. The Chinese have blocked off the whole world, so they do their own thing, and they are running their own system. There's no concept of privacy in China, and the general approach is, this is your government. What have you got to hide? Nothing wrong if us. I mean, it's like a parent to a child. We should know what you're doing. Okay, we are unlikely to go in that direction. Then you've got two different approaches. You've got the Europeans and you've got the Americans. Now, the Europeans are very concerned about the misuse of the digital economy, and they want a fairly strong degree of regulation, ostensibly to protect privacy and this and that. The Americans take the exact opposite approach. They say this is all nonsense. This is the area of innovation. We should have the least possible intervention. The Europeans point out that what this has done, unlike in other economies, where competition leads to private enterprise flourishing, the nature of the digital economy makes it very difficult for new entrants to come in. And basically, winner takes all. I mean, at the moment, is dominated by 5 or 6 companies, okay? And look at it this way. It's not that innovation takes place only in these companies. Innovation starts in Princeton and Stanford and what have you, and some little startup comes up with something different, okay? The big guys are quite happy to buy it up. So the guy who's done, and they buy it up with the employees. So if all you want is a lot of money and a good job, you've got it. But there'll be some people hope, people like Zuckerberg, who feel that no, they're going to upend this whole system and stay independent and then develop their ideas. Remember, when these companies buy up a startup, it's not necessarily to build that technology. It's very often to just kill it and improve their own, okay? I don't think a Mark Zuckerberg could exist today because when he became important, there weren't these big dominant companies.
Giants.
So the Europeans say that, look, that's the wrong thing to do. All right. Now, we would be torn between there are guys in the country who want freedom. There are other guys who worry about cronyism. So it's a real question. What should India do? Should we align our digital approach to the Europeans or to the Americans? Underneath all this, in terms of markets, the Europeans are as big as a whole as the United States. The difference, I think, is that what the Americans say is that the Europeans have seen a collapse of productivity. And that's actually true. Per capita incomes in Europe are flattening out, and in some countries even going down. Productivity has certainly gone down. Even in Germany, productivity has gone down big time. The Americans say this is because excess regulation. Okay? Now, first of all, we need to know from our own experts which one of them is pro the European model. I don't think anyone would be pro the Chinese model, so that you can rule out. Which one is pro the European model and which one is pro the American model? I don't think our experts have said so. I'm not at all confident that this decision can be left to a few bureaucrats who happen to be in the relevant ministry that does the negotiation. Because if you look at their own background, I mean, they will have served in agriculture, municipal service, etc.
Yes.
So, I mean, and yet we have terrific talent in this area. We also have think tanks that are working on this in Bangalore and other places. Now, this is a huge, and I'm saying this at a time when nobody in government should be sensitive because we haven't announced our decision. But how we get to that decision is critical. I would hope that they would pick the top 4 or 5 Indian technical experts. I won't mention names, many of them are friends, but they're obvious.
Yes.
And encourage them to lay out the options and lay out the reasons why they would go one way or the other. And I think if they were honest, they would also lay out that, look, we've considered these options, and quite frankly, there are differences amongst us, and we leave it to the government to decide. That would be a real way of generating public opinion. Because first of all, public opinion needs to be educated on what the issue is. Otherwise, whatever the government says, the opposition will oppose, and it will just become a tutu meme kind of discussion,
True.
which is not very helpful.
See, this related to it, I just want to flag a point which has always struck me. No matter what crisis India faces, 1980, 1991, 1998, the sanctions after nuke tests, 2008, COVID-19, every time the Indian economy rebounds very well. And the entire bureaucracy comes into operation. It's really streamlined functioning. Unfortunately, in normal times, none of this happens. You have served in government from beginning. I mean, you've seen the 80 crisis onwards. So why is it? I'm just curious to know.
No, I mean, first, you're right that, India does well in a crisis. The steel frame of the administration, when the objective is very clear, and you're not looking at what the consequences are for the next 20 years. I mean, let's take COVID, for example. When the initial outburst happened, nobody knew how serious it was going to be. I mean, in a couple of months, it was quite clear that it's serious. And the issue of vaccination came up, okay? Even within the government, there were people who sort of said, no, vaccination is not this. I remember one mantri saying that if you pat a cow, over a certain period of time, it will immunize you from. But the government decided the right thing. That is, we must vaccinate. That decision, some people think, could have been taken a couple of months earlier, but that's not very important. The implementation of the vaccination decision was clearly outstanding. I mean, we happen to have the AstraZeneca vaccine, which the Serum Institute produced. It's a sort of foreign invented but domestically produced vaccine, and 80% of the vaccinations came from them. There was also an Indian vaccine, biotech something in Hyderabad, which also functioned, and they did about 20% of the supply. But taken together, the number of people that got covered in a reasonable time was pretty good. But, that's like we know how to run elections. I mean, we get to every village, the election commission brings election boxes or machines, etc. So that's one thing. That's the ability to get the system to focus on well-defined tasks. But I think for the longer term, you need a much clearer agenda, and you need a broader sort of process of getting acceptance. And let's face it, compared to 1991, we are now running a much more complex economy. Frankly, in 1991, I mean, I'm not underestimating, I'm proud to have been part of it. Those were low-hanging fruits. if you were going to get rid of industrial licensing, only a few big industries cared about it, right? They weren't happy with the trade liberalization. They weren't happy with the FDI, and even
the Bombay Club. You remember?
Even Rahul, who was deemed to have founded the Bombay Club, although he rightly pointed out that a lot of others had the same view. Only he was outspoken and he would speak out. But they represented their case to government. We argued with them, and deep down they realized that look, they got to get their act together. But other than that, I mean, as we now move into more complex areas, like, dealing with agriculture, reforming the marketing laws, farm laws ran into problems. I'm sure that if you try to handle land, that'll run into all kinds of problems too. So the problems are more complex. That's why I personally feel that in some of these areas, land, labor, and agriculture, it's best to take the view that we will lay out what a reform program is and let the state decide. But there too, there are some complex areas. Like, for example, should Indian farmers have access to, genetically modified seeds? Now, we've allowed that in the case of cotton. Although we have not gone to the next stage, and the one we are using, BT2, is actually run out of its effectiveness. NGOs are very anti allowing sort of genetically modified food. On the other hand, around the world, people are using all these people who travel from India to the United States, I don't find them going on fasts, and they're happily eating stuff which is full of genetically modified ingredients, okay? So, but we have not given our farmers access to genetically modified seeds. On the other hand, climate change, we know, is going to have devastating effects if we don't do anything. I mean, some people say that agricultural productivity, which means land productivity, might go down by 16% in another 20 years or so. We need seeds that can actually deal with this problem. Do these have to be limited to hybridization, or can we use genetic modification in order to develop these seeds? It's a legitimate question, but it's not being debated. I mean, the space is occupied by a few NGOs. I've seen a letter written by Chengal Reddy from Andhra Pradesh, who is a very well-known farmer activist, who I think he's written a letter to the government and he's published it also, saying that Indian farmers need high-quality seeds. Now, if the genetically modified seed is going to lead to an increase of 100% in productivity, then if you care about farmers, that you must either persuade them that this is bad or allow them to use it. One way of protecting consumers, of course, is to say that whoever uses the genetically modified seed, we should make sure that the output is identified as being genetically modified, so those who don't want it don't use it, something like that. But these are complex issues, not like 1991.
True. So, Chief, in a new world order where globalization is receding, protectionism is rising, like I pointed out in the intro, how can India balance strategic autonomy with the need for deeper economic integration with the rest of the world?
That's a very, very important question. The United States has not only weaponized tariffs, but has individualized its reaction to individual countries, which is not, in my view, the right thing to do. And it always raises the question of what is driving them, okay? But I think, let's be clear, only the US is doing this. The rest of the world, as far as I can see, is keen on continuing to trade on a rules-based trading system. They're not doing it in the WTO, but they're willing to do it plurilaterally. So I think the correct strategy for us, we have to handle the US in the best way we can, and I'm glad that there are negotiations going on. Let's hope that something good comes of it. But as far as the rest of the world is concerned, we must internally be quite clear that we want to reduce tariffs. President Trump was right when he said that India is a tariff king. Now, he's become the tariff king. We are no longer the tariff king. But we have to recognize that our tariffs are too high, and we need to lower them. Now, fortunately, with the UK, we've signed an FTA, excellent idea. I believe we're negotiating one with the EU. Hopefully, that'll get signed. If we do sign one in the next month or two, it'll give a very clear signal that, look, India is willing to lower tariffs, except in certain strategic areas. Those are always there. Typically in a free trade agreement, you cover 90% of tariff line. Nobody ever covers 100%. So if we were to do 90%, that would be a very significant signal. That would leave out Asia. And actually, most of the growth is going to come from Asia. So we will have to handle China as best as we can. And I'm glad that there is some normalization taking place. But the other areas, we need to enter into a free trade agreement. Now, one of them is obviously RCEP. We walked out of it at the last minute. And I believe there was a lot of resistance to giving free trade access to China. Maybe that's still there. If you can't do RCEP, we should apply to join the CPTPP. That is held by Japan, includes Korea and Taiwan and others. I think it's what they call a deep agreement. It's not just about tariffs. But none of these agreements is now about tariffs. It will include reaching some agreements on investment, some agreements on standard technology transfers, IPR, etc. Let's face it, we should take trade agreements out of the traditional hands of the Commerce Ministry, which has traditionally, for the last 30 years, taken the view that trade policy is about tariffs, everything else is separate. The world has moved on. Everybody else is signing agreements which cover these things. So we should also negotiate for that. And, we have to recognize that we cannot simultaneously claim that we are going to become a developed country by 2047 and refuse to enter into agreements which other countries are entering into. The new agreements don't take place immediately. You can negotiate a 10-year transition. So that means what you agree in 2025 will become effective maybe fully effective by 2035. Now, if you want to become a developed country by 2047, from 35 to 47 is only very few years. We should get our standards and everything in line with what other countries are agreeing to. This is a big issue. And unfortunately, even in our press, there is a completely wrong perception that other countries are wrongly using trade negotiations to push these things. I think we should accept the fact that is happening. That's where the world is going. And we should then get into the ball game and negotiate our position.
But to the Commerce Ministry's credit and the Government of India, the UK FTA, the India-UAE FTA, the India-Australia one, are all based purely not on trade. They include investment, they include tech transfer, they include non-conventional energy.
You're right. The Australian FTA is very shallow. Its coverage is limited. UAE is not much. The only thing it exports is maybe oil, and we don't have a problem with that. So I don't take that too seriously. Yes, EFTA, those countries are important. UK is very, very important, and I give credit to the Commerce Ministry for new. But I would say that the UK FTA is the first new generation FTA that we have signed. Okay, if we successfully sign one with the EU, which seems to be talked about, then I think we will establish credibility. Particularly when you go to the CPTPP, many of those countries have recollections that India is never willing to agree to these things. We'll be able to say to them, look, we've signed with UK, we've signed with EU, what's wrong with you guys, And I think that would be the real thing. These earlier FTAs don't count for too much in my view. If you want to question them, you can do that. But that's not being done. You have to claim it from each separate state. That's just absurd.
If 91 was about ending license Raj, I think 2025 has to be about ending Babu Raj.
Well, I think the poor Babus are too much criticized, so I won't put it that way. I think it's the next stage of. But the important thing is we must move away from slogans to specific action. Because at the slogan level, everybody agrees. It's the real question to ask is, if you agree on ease of doing business, why don't you agree to this? Now, that answer you can't expect from a minister, but as you call the civil service should provide that answer. And if it's not credible, well, the political level can act. I'm not without hope, but I just hope that the debate now comes down to this level. Because I think if it does, you will find that many little resistances can be very easily overcome.
Stop on that note. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
So you heard Mr. Ahluwalia. Like he rightly said, there's time to move from talk to walking the talk. So if 1991 was an instance of survival, then the target of 2047 is premised on India's ability to execute from now on. The clock is ticking. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to StratNewsGlobal.Tech on YouTube. Hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any updates. And please do share your thoughts, ideas, and suggestions with us. I'm available on X at Capital Calculus. I'll be back next week with another episode.